On May the 15th, 1885, Madame de Beausacq was dining with her cousin, a well-known writer and academician who lived in an old street in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. As she drove there through the clear and fine twilight of the Champs-Élysées, she thought of the novel she was reading in the Revue des Deux Mondes. She had read the first instalment and was interested in the story. The second instalment was just published, and she regretted she had not had time to glance through it, for she was going to meet the author, Mr. James Mason, at dinner. And thinking of Mr. Mason and his heroine, a woman of 30 who reminded her of herself, Madame de Beausacq noticed, as the coupe passed over the Pont Neuf, that the Seine seemed a little river in comparison with the wide, flowing Thames. She had spent a honeymoon in London, and she wondered if she had really loved her husband. All that was a long while ago, and young men who would declare their passion, if she held out ever so little encouragement, did not interest her at all. She supposed that she was different from other women. All the women she knew had lovers. She was the only virtuous woman in her set. She was the only one against whom no one could say anything. It was at least something. The coupe entered the Rue de Varenne and stopped at a large corner house. As the coachman turned his horse into the porte cochère, Mr. James Mason slipped aside to let the carriage pass. He was thin, tall, fair, typical Englishman. This was his first visit to Monsieur Renoir. The publication of the translation of his novel in the Revue had procured for him the invitation. He waited on the pavement's edge, for the coupe was standing in the passage in front of the glass door opening onto the staircase. The door of the coupe opened, and, all in pink, Madame de Beausacq stepped out. "There is entertainment in that waist," thought Mason. And a love story, a vision of blue-black hair and a pink dress passed through his mind. He smiled at the idea that a passing appearance had inspired in him. But truly she seemed to mean more than the others. She seemed significant of something, and he regretted that he would never see her again. He heard the hollow sound of a horse's hoofs on the asphalt of the courtyard as he ran, hoping to catch a last glimpse of her on the staircase. But she had already stopped, and looking up, he saw the entertaining waist disappearing through a door. "I shall never see her again," he thought. He sighed, and remembered that he had forgotten to ask on which floor Monsieur Renoir lived. And when the concierge said, "Au premier," he was genuinely taken aback. Then he would meet the lady of his sudden admiration in Monsieur Renoir's drawing-room. They were going to dine together. Mason had spent the larger part of his 33 years talking to women, thinking about women, observing women, and formulating his impressions of women. He could therefore divine their thoughts through their slightest actions. He had already noticed that Madame de Beausacq was looking thin, but he had to speak to his hostess. When the conversation paused and he looked up, he found to his pleasure and surprise that Madame de Beausacq's eyes were still fixed upon him. Upon my word, it would seem as if... It may be no more than curiosity. However, I shall soon know. If she looks at me again in that way before the entree, I shall know it is all right. Mason talked to his hostess about indifferent things until the servants came in with the entree. Then he looked up. Madame de Beausacq's eyes were fixed upon him. She must take me for a fool if she thinks I do not understand. And he tried to compose a look which could be interpreted, "We'll settle all that in the drawing-room after dinner." He had expected to find her waiting for him, but very much to his surprise, she sat down at the card table and played whist for an hour. And Mason talked to various people, looking at her from time to time, but she sat, her eyes fixed on her cards. Most strange, he thought. I could have sworn it. I'm not often mistaken. Soon after, he heard that she was going to a ball at 10:30. I shan't have an opportunity of even speaking to her, he thought, and his eyes went to the clock. Madame de Beausacq's eyes had also gone to the clock, and seeing how late it was, she got up from the card table and came towards him, pulling her fingers into the long mauve kid. They sat down together as far from the others as possible. She told him she had often heard of him, that she had read the first part of his book and would read the second tomorrow. She had liked the story very much indeed. If he could come and see her tomorrow, she would tell him what she thought of the second part of his novel. Unfortunately, she said, raising her eyes, it is my at-home day. That is unfortunate. You will come, won't you? I want to see you. The moment was full of peril, and he was glad when she said, I must go now. So little suffices to upset these kind of things. And he watched her dark, thin shoulders disappear through the doorway, and wondered what developments tomorrow's visit would bring forth. At the ball, Madame de Beausacq wore a strange, melancholy air. She danced hardly at all, and asked her husband, much to his satisfaction, to take her home before the cotillion. Not a word was exchanged in the carriage, but when they were alone in their room, she said, laying her arm on his shoulder and looking at him sadly, I wonder, Albert, if you still like me. My dear, what makes you ask such a question? I hope no one has... No, nothing of that. No one has told me stories about you. I was only thinking, it is 4 years since we were married. 4 years ago we were in London. I did love you then, didn't I? And you were crazy about me. I wonder if you've been true to me all this while. Tell me. I shall forgive you. Tell me, she said. Bertha, someone must... No, dear, no one has. Only I want to know. Madame de Beausacq sighed deeply. Her hand fell from his shoulder, and she watched her husband take off his coat. It seemed to her that he had grown stouter since breakfast, and she took up the Revue des Deux Mondes and sat down and wondered. Aren't you coming to bed? He said, laying his face on the pillow. Not yet. I'm going to read. Then good night, dear. I'm rather tired. Next day, when Mason called on Madame de Beausacq, the footman led him through a suite of lofty rooms filled with bronze and tapestries, and it was in the last room, a beautiful room, that he found Madame de Beausacq and her company. He hoped that these ladies and gentlemen would go soon, and that Madame would refrain from looking at him till they were alone. His wishes were gratified. Not once did he catch her looking at him, and he had to console himself with the thought that women always slip into exaggeration. He waited as long as he dared. More ladies arrived, and at 4:15 he felt he must go. He bade her goodbye. Her eyes were empty of the love he expected to find there, and he walked through the rooms feeling rather crestfallen. Suddenly he became aware that Madame de Beausacq had left the guests. They were alone in the anteroom. I've read the second part of your novel. You're the young man. Do you run away with the married woman? Do you mean in reality or in fiction? In reality. There's no necessity in running away. Is there? Perhaps not, she said. But we haven't a moment. Someone else will ring presently. Are you going to the Prince's masked ball tonight? I haven't an invitation. I will send you one. What time? 11:30, she whispered, and flew back to her guests. When Mason had gone, Madame de Beausacq felt that she had acted very wrongly. She went to her husband, feeling that a kind word would save her. He took her in his arms and said she was looking pale. He kissed her, and for a moment she thought that she felt better. But the overmastering passion which Mason had inspired in her was not to be swept away by a little uxorial kiss. To free herself from its clutch, she must appeal to her child. Perhaps her baby's kisses would win her back to reason, and she took little Claire out of her cot. Mother is going to a ball. What would baby do if Mother never were to come back? Claire began to cry and hid her face on her mother's shoulder. What would baby do? Die, said the poor little thing, sobbing, and Madame de Beausec laid the little girl back in her cot. She walked down the passage with a firm step. Her little girl had saved her. She would not go to the ball. At that moment she caught sight of the dress she had intended to wear, a pink dress, the same she had worn at her cousin's, and without warning all the intolerable desire came back, and for a sense of choking in the throat she could hardly answer her maid, who had come to ask if she would dress now. She sat down, unable to decide. At last she determined to think no more. She would go to the ball. Going to the ball didn't mean... She would go to the ball. She called her maid and dressed hurriedly in the strange calm of mind which follows submission to temptation. At the same moment, Mason was tying his white necktie. He stopped his cab at Baron, the costumier's, intending to hire a Venetian mantle, but as he was trying one on, a strange thought came into his mind. Never in all his experience had he provoked so uncontrollable a passion. If he were to put this frantic passion to a severe test... He smiled, and forthwith refused the Venetian mantle, and paused to consider what costume he would adopt. Madame de Beausec was dressed in the pink gown she had worn on the night she had met Mason. She carried a bouquet of orchids in her hand, and she moved forward slowly, shaking hands with her friends, searching amid the crowd for her lover. Suddenly she heard someone call her softly. She knew it was he. She turned, her face aflame with pleasure. But the look of pleasure vanished, and a little cry of horror escaped her. A tall white Pierrot, incredibly hideous, stood beside her. The white powder seemed to have surprisingly lengthened Mason's long face. He was hideous, ridiculous. He asked her to dance. She excused herself, and taking a friend's arm, passed up the room. When she returned, he asked her to sit out a dance with him. It was difficult to refuse, and she took his arm, and they sought a quiet corner. But the spell was broken. Conversation was impossible. She could not tolerate the horrible white face, and got up to go. As she drove home, she looked at her husband almost with the same eyes that she had looked at him with 4 years ago, when they were in London on their honeymoon. When she arrived home, she took little Claire out of her cot and kissed the poor little sleepy face till it was wide awake. And so did a powder puff save a woman, when other remedies had failed, from the calamity of a great passion.